So this week we're making a very easy steak with the Tarragon pan sauce. Now I've been doing the low carb diet, I've been keto for around 10 days now. I'm trying to lose a little bit of body fat, so we're gonna make a low carb meal. We're gonna make this beautiful steak, nice Tarragon sauce. It's gonna be delicious. We're gonna use a flat iron steak. Now if you haven't had a flat iron steak, I'll explain a little bit of what that is, explain some alternatives to it. This recipe comes together super fast, 15 to 20 minutes. It's perfect. You can pair it with some broccoli or asparagus to keep it low carb. Anyways, make sure you guys like and subscribe and share this video, and without further ado, let's get to cooking. Okay, so let's talk about this steak here. What we have here is a flat iron steak. This comes from the chuck of the cow or the shoulder. It's very well marbled, it's super beefy, very, very tender. Now this is a grass-fed cut that came from my cow that we got about a year or so ago. So as you can see, the marbling is not as pronounced as it would be on a grain-fed cow. So if you get a grain-fed flat iron steak, it's gonna be a lot more marbled. This will still be tender as hell, don't get me wrong, but you're definitely sleeping on this cut of meat if you've never tried it. It's super delicious, highly recommend giving it a try. So we're gonna keep this very simple. We're just gonna season it with a little bit of salt. Now keep in mind, this recipe applies to any steak really. If you wanna use a strip steak, you wanna use a ribeye, same principles apply. Now the reason I'm not gonna season this with pepper is because sometimes pepper burns when you go ahead and sear it. So what I'll do is I'll add the pepper once it sears on both sides, and then we're gonna let our steak rest. Another thing is this is gonna cook very, very fast. As you can see, it's pretty thin. So we're just gonna let this hang out here for about 20 minutes while we fire up our pan. Then we're gonna sear this steak, and then we're gonna make a quick pan sauce. Okay, now we're gonna use a 10-inch frying pan on medium heat. Now you have to use a neutral oil, and you wanna make sure it has a high smoke point. So we're gonna add a little bit of avocado oil. Now I like to use avocado oil because it's a perceived healthier oil than a canola or a vegetable oil. So highly recommend using this. Also, it has a high smoke point, perfect for searing a steak. All right, so what I have here is one of these laser thermometers. Now this is very helpful because we want the pan to heat up to about 368 degrees, a little bit less than 400 to make sure we get a good sear. Now you can always just kind of guess if the oil starts to shimmer, you'll know it's hot enough, or you have one of these thermometers and you can basically exactly tell how hot the oil is before you drop in your steak. So we're right about there, we're at 360 degrees, there we go, 370. So now what we're gonna do here, I wanna make sure my steak is nice and dry, and now we're gonna lay it in away from us. Now we're gonna press down slightly so it makes good contact with the pan and gets a good sear. Another option is use a weight. You just place the weight right on top, and that'll ensure that the steak gets a good sear. We're gonna let this go for around 2 to 3 minutes on this side, then give it a flip, and we'll go for another 2 to 3 minutes, and the steak will probably be a perfect medium rare at that point, but we'll test it. All right, let's check and see where we're at here. Now before we flip this, we wanna make sure this is nice and dry so we can get a good sear. If your meat is wet, you're not gonna get a good sear. You gotta make sure it's dry. All right, let's go ahead and give it a flip, see where we're at here. There we go, beautiful sear on our meat. We're gonna go ahead and hit it with some black pepper right now on this side, and then we're gonna let it go for another 2 minutes or so on this side. All right, so now I'm gonna check this for doneness. I just wanna see where we're at so we don't overcook the steak. You see we're at 108 over here. We're gonna let that keep going for a little bit. Now what we're gonna do, I'm actually gonna turn down the heat. So now we're just gonna let this cook till it reaches our desired doneness. Hit this side with a little bit of black pepper as well. Go ahead and get a temperature on this side. We're at about 115 or so. You want to flip often. A lot of people say you take a steak, you sear it, and then you don't touch it. That's true for when you're searing. When you're trying to cook it to doneness, you want to flip it often so that it actually cooks evenly on both sides. You can also do a test where you poke the meat like this, and as you can see, it's pretty springy, which leads me to believe it's still rare. And we also have confirmed that with our temperature. So we've reached our target temperature. Now keep in mind, this is gonna carry over about 5 degrees or so. We're gonna let this rest over here while we make our sauce. So we're gonna use the same pan because you see all those little bits, that little fond in there? We want that flavor in our sauce. Just a touch more avocado oil, not too much. Now we're gonna add in our minced onion, a little bit of salt. Now I would like to use a shallot if I had one. I didn't have a shallot, so the next best thing is to use what you got, which is a red onion. So I just cut up a little bit of red onion, about a tablespoon or 2. We're just gonna let this get nice and translucent, loosen up some of that fond on the bottom of the pan. Now it's only been 1 minute. As you can see, the onions are nice and translucent. They got some good color on them. We're gonna add in 2 cloves of some minced garlic, and then about a tablespoon of some dried tarragon. I'm using the tarragon today because I don't have any fresh herbs. If you had fresh herbs, you can always use fresh tarragon. tarragon, a nice big sprig, some fresh thyme, some rosemary. If you don't have fresh herbs, dried is fine. Just keep in mind though, you have to use a little bit more of the dried herbs. And I can already start to smell it. It smells amazing. I'm smelling that garlic. I'm smelling that tarragon. It smells delicious in here. So only takes about 30 seconds. Once you start to smell that garlic, we're gonna add just a little bit of Dijon mustard, not much. This is about a little half a teaspoon, just to give it a little bit of that umami. And then just a little dash of some Worcestershire sauce. We're gonna go ahead and mix that in. That mustard smells delicious. And then we're gonna hit it with a little bit of dry sherry. You can use whiskey, you can use white wine, you can just leave out the wine altogether and you can just use stock. We're gonna use a little bit of stock as well. Now we just want this wine to kind of evaporate and we want it to reduce by at least half. Anytime you add wine, you have to let it reduce or else your sauce will taste a little bit boozy. It's not a very pleasant flavor profile if you don't let your wine reduce. So you at least wanna let it reduce for a couple of minutes, or the rule of thumb is by half. So it's been about 3 minutes or so, and as you can see, our wine is nice and reduced. You can see the bottom of the pan. We're gonna add just a touch of some stock. Now at this point, we're gonna crank the heat up because I wanna bring this stock to a boil, because we definitely gotta let this stock reduce by half again. It's gonna start to thicken slightly. We're also gonna add a little bit of cream to this and butter, which will also thicken our sauce as well. If you don't do this, your sauce is gonna be a little too thin and it's not gonna have the right texture when you go to eat this with your steak. I'm also gonna add a little bit of lemon juice right now for some acidity. You could also add a little bit of the lemon zest to this if you'd like. It's not really meant to be a lemon sauce, so I'm not gonna add the lemon zest, but if you like, you can always add the zest. I do recommend zesting your citrus and adding it to your sauces. Okay, so after about 5 minutes or so, this is good enough for me. I don't want it to completely reduce because then we're not gonna have enough sauce. But as you can see, if I go like this, you can see that trail, right? That's how you kind of know that you've reduced the stock enough. Let's do it again. See that, how that comes back real slow? That's what you're looking for to know if you've reduced. Now, this is optional. I like to add a touch of heavy cream. You don't necessarily need the cream. You can always just use the butter. Go ahead and stir this in. At this point, we wanna make sure we turn the heat to low. We don't wanna scorch this. So we're gonna actually just reduce this until it simmers just slightly. So as you can see, our sauce is simmering just a little bit. I'm gonna add some parsley for some color. Now at this point, we're gonna turn the heat off. We're gonna melt a few tablespoons of butter into the sauce. Now, the butter is gonna make sure this gets emulsified. Very gently, just go ahead and mix this in until the butter is melted. Now, I don't like to season this until this point, because this is salted butter. You can use unsalted if you'd like, then you have to season a little more. I like to use salted butter, but keeping in mind not to over salt things. I'm gonna go ahead and give this a quick taste. That tastes perfect. And the reason why I'm not gonna salt it, we seasoned our steak with salt and pepper, so you don't want it to be too salty. But what you're actually looking for is this. When you take a spoonful of sauce, you want to coat the back of a spoon, just like this. And that's how you know when it's reduced enough and your sauce is thick enough to grip your steak. Okay, so we're gonna set this aside. Let's go ahead and slice up our steak. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you guys how to slice this. Now, a flat iron steak is one of those cuts that has a grain. So you wanna make sure you cut against the grain. Now, the way you find the grain, we have to look in here and kind of figure out which way the fibers are going. And I can just see by looking at this, the fibers are running this way, which means we have to slice the steak like this, against the grain so we have a nice tender bite. Also, make sure you rest your steak. You wanna make sure it rests for about half the time that you cook it at least, so that it absorbs all the rest of the juices and it doesn't become dry. So now we're just gonna go ahead and slice this steak here. About 1/2-inch strips or so. And as you can see, our steak is a beautiful medium rare. You'll start to see it'll start to bring back some of that color. When you first cut the steak, it's gonna look like it's more medium. As it sits here, the juices are gonna start to run out a little bit, and you'll see that it's actually a beautiful medium rare. Okay, now let's go ahead and serve this up, and then we're gonna go ahead and give it a taste. Add a nice amount of our sauce. I'll tell you what, I nailed the consistency of this sauce. I don't like to toot my own horn. That consistency of that sauce is beautiful. Look at that. A little bit more, why not? Hit it with a little bit of fresh parsley for some color there. And there it is, that's our beautiful flat iron steak with a tarragon pan sauce. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Give a little dip of this sauce here. That sauce is absolutely fantastic. Right off the bat, the tarragon's coming through heavy. You can really taste that tarragon. I love tarragon. You know, like I said before, you can use thyme, you can use rosemary. Just use whatever you have. Fresh herbs are obviously better. You can get away with dried herbs, but definitely a lot of tarragon flavor, which I really like. The consistency of the sauce is perfect. It's gripping that steak. As you can see, it's staying on the plate. It's not running all over the place. It's not real liquidy. Our steak, medium rare, nice beefy flavor, very tender. If you guys see flat iron steak in the grocery store, buy it. Look for that marbling. Like I said, this is a grass-fed one, so it's a little bit leaner. If you get this in the grocery store, it's gonna have a little bit more of that marbling. Anyways, you guys gotta give it a try if you're doing low carb, if you're doing keto. It's the perfect meal to try on a busy weeknight. But anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video or you learned something, give me a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.
Ooh.